Cool. My goal today is to kind of go through a practice challenge kind of shaped thing. I've deployed this, by the way. It's called Art Galleries. We've also deployed a slightly harder one for over the weekend called Blood Oath. And that one is going to be like when you've done all your basic stuff and you want to practice code challenge stuff and you want to actually beyond that practice like something even harder than a code challenge, then you go into Blood Oath. This one is also a nice practice. It's smaller scoped. This is more like similar to what you might see in like a Tuesday morning type scenario. So that's what we're going to dig into here. And I've got my chat window here on the corner. I'm going to quiet down some other stuff on my screen real quick that y'all can't see because it's all Zoom UI. And we'll dig in here. What I want to do today is kind of practice, like by example, what it feels like to maybe make predictions about code, and I want us to get better at doing that. This is something that can only really happen inside, but when some code is about to start running, you can either have the atmosphere of like, I'm going to watch this happen like a movie and then see what I learn from it, or you can have the atmosphere of, I'm going to declare what's going to happen. I'm going to see if I'm the person that can predict. And then if your prediction is right, you know something. And if your prediction is wrong, you learn something. So we need to figure out very quickly how to get into a nice feedback loop so that we can test these predictions. We need to ask Ruby a lot of questions, predict what the answer is going to be, see what the answer is, make sure that we're right. If we're not right, make sure that we're adjusting in the right direction. So that also means if we're going to get feedback from Ruby, we need to be using like pry to debug stuff, or at the very least, we need to be using like puts to print things out, or p to inspect things a little bit deeper and print that stuff out. In order to do that, we need to have access to the code that we want to run, and so it's important to know like a good pattern, this runner file pattern that we've talked about a little bit. Want to dive into that and really get explicit about how that brings stuff together. And as we go, like the overall goal is to do all of the above stuff, to do something that's scary, write code to satisfy user stories without the help of pre-written tests, right? It's very gratifying to get a test running, right? Um, it's comfortable, right? My dog like knows commands and then he does the command and that's a comfortable vibe to be in. Like I feel like sometimes I get to feel dog like in a happy way, like just endlessly positive and get nice treats for doing like simple stuff. And this is not that zone, right? This is a place that I have to be the one that like decides what a treat biscuit is made of. And all of a sudden I have to go to the lab and put my lab coat on and it's not just like a simple motion of like if I do this thing and then this thing it always works. Now we're getting to the point that the moves that we make have to be based on some like underpinning knowledge. So we have to like get the training wheels off, and we have to be able to even write our own training wheels. So that's the goal, right? Recognizing that any test code that's written is really just somebody who made an assertion at some point about how they thought code should behave. And if you can make an assertion and turn that into code, then you can test assertions too, even if they're not as stringently written as like pure test syntax. So this is an art gallery lab deal. And to just kind of illustrate what we just talked about, if I try to do this in RSpec fail fast, it runs tests, but there's no tests written, so like there's no failures. Things are just like running, and that's how it is. So I now have this problem of how do I figure this out? Well, what kind of files do I have? Okay, we have README app config tools. So let's walk through this. If I say ls and then pass in a folder as an argument, so we have ls app. We can see that there's something called models in here, so I can say ls app models. I don't have to like cd into stuff if I don't want to. Just a little terminal practice here, getting used to getting info from my code. Yeah, question.
Yeah, sorry, dude. I have a couple of interviews I gotta do in a few minutes here.
Yeah, totally.
But before I headed out, I wanted to mention that I think there's in the discussion questions this morning something that I've seen a lot of people kind of got hung up on and tripped over.
Okay.
There was like an inconsistency or like an error in how they were asking people to return results, and so they had an instance and they had you assign an attribute to that instance,
Okay.
and they expected the return value just to be like the instance itself with no attributes shown or anything like that,
Hmm.
which I think is just kind of maybe an oversight
Let's see.
in my eyes. Yeah, it's easier to see if we pull it up. And I know a lot of people were really spending a lot of time trying to say, okay, trying to figure out how do I get this instance shown which you can do if you do a put statement, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, if you do the put statement, you see the instance, but you don't see the attributes. Is this the piece we're talking about? The
it's
car.all?
the third question actually.
Third? Let's see here. This one here?
Yeah, all the way at the bottom. So right there, photo on line 11.
Yeah.
So on line 7, you're assigning a user attribute to Sophie,
Mm-hmm.
and then they're expecting this on line 11 to look as such.
Sophie.photos. So sandwich photo is photo.new. Sophie is user.new. Sandwich photo.user gets set to Sophie. Sandwich photo.user.name. We return Sophie because the user object is set on the sandwich photo. Then we call Sophie.photos and then we end up with a photo. Yeah. Okay. So the question is like, how does that come to be that we would find that we would have a photo object in this output array?
Well, how would you just get the photo object and not? Because the moment you start calling Sophie.photo.user, you're now attaching other attributes to the photo, right? Because Sophie.user equals Sophie, so now the photo has a user attached to it and that name attached to it, right? The object now has those other things in it.
Yeah.
I guess is what's confusing.
So what's interesting here is like what's not said but what's implied, right? So sandwich photo equals this photo.new. So this is just a photo instance. It doesn't seem to have any information. So something implied there is that it's possible to create a photo with an optional initial argument somehow, because later on we do see that a photo has the ability to hold a user instance. So it was possible to get this user instance in after creating the initial object. What I would kind of see in my mind's eye is something like this. I'm seeing like a class photo, and I'm seeing an initialize method that can take a user or not, and also that has a readable or a writable user. Which I believe this code would allow me to say something like, if I also had a user class, I'll refactor this later. But a user seems to be something based on this code that we pass in a name and then that responds to user.name because I see Sophie in two places here and this is the only place that it seems to have come from. So class, so this would initialize with a name and have a reader for it so we can access it through that method call. And that reader is going to need to talk to an instance variable that matches, which will be set by the argument. So if that syntax works, I feel like at this point these 4 lines of code could work. So I'm going to paste them in here and try it out. We can try to p this to see the return value as Sophie. That would kind of test that all this stuff has come together. And so let's try that out. Our Ruby app models photo. And that does print out Sophie. Let's print out some other stuff. Let's practice like learning more stuff other than just like copy pasting and checking. What I'm going to do now is like to get a binding.pry going, which means since I'm just running this one file in isolation, I do need to manually require pry here. And so I'll just put a little 0 at the end so that pry doesn't break at the end of me working with it. And we'll try this again. Wonderful. We're at pry. We can check on what sandwich photo is. When we look at this object, we see that it's an instance of the photo class and that it has an instance variable user and that the value of that instance variable on this photo is an instance of the user class, which has the name Sophie. That's actually a carbon copy of our variable Sophie, by the way. Oops, 2 H's. My keyboard's got that butterfly sticky key thing going on. But check it out, this Ruby hash is the same. It's literally the same exact Ruby object being referred to in different places. And that's because we said sandwichphoto.user equals literally Sophie, so it's this same exact instance of user that gets stored within our photo object at that instance variable using like an accessor method, conventionally speaking. So then this is where it gets kind of screwy, right? Because how does changing a value on a photo change a user's behavior output, right? Like we didn't change anything about Sophie's photos here. All that we did was assign a photo a user, right? This is the hardest implication because it's the newest one. And this is the new implication of going to photo as the single source of truth for all of Sophie's photos. If that's the case, if Sophie's only searching through all the photos that exist, then Sophie could find a photo that has a changed attribute the moment that that photo's attribute changes. Kind of like if somebody scratched out an old name on a shirt and wrote my name on it and threw it back in the drawer, the very next time I go back to the drawer, I know that that shirt is now mine because it's got my name on it now. And I didn't have to, nobody had to tap me on the shoulder, right? All they had to do was change the shirt. Nobody had to tap Sophie on the shoulder. All they have to do is change the photo because that belongs to Sophie now that we've attached it as the user. So for that to work, we need to have a drawer, so to speak, for Sophie to do the searching for. So the user needs to have a way to search through all the photos that exist to find the photos that belong to them. And I think that's that implication, which brings together like kind of the newest stuff that we've been talking about later in the week. So that would require us to have like the class variable all, which would be an array. That would require us every time a new photo got created to shovel in there. And that would also require us to have a method that could be accessed from outside the class, right? But we wouldn't just call it on an instance of photo. We wouldn't want one photo to tell us about all the photos, so we make it a class method using the self keyword, and then just have that return the class scoped variable. And so now if a user needs to get their photos, that's a question of, well, let's see what it's a question of. We'll do a binding.pry right here, and then we'll call sophie.photos, right? This is kind of the thing I'm talking about, right? That like as much as possible, I don't want to overwrite my code. Like right now we've done a lot. We've tested this like photo.all thing. I haven't really run this code, so any of this stuff could be broken. So before I get too deep in defining what a user photos method would be, my thought is let's get into a pry session here. While I'm in here, I can start like testing my assumptions about the code that I wrote in the photo class to see if I'm even ready to write the right syntax in here or not, or if my assumptions are all off. So I'm going to call Sophie.photos. I predict that because I've got the instance method photos on user here, that we're going to have a binding.pry. And this is what we'd now call a virtual attribute, perhaps, right? Because instead of having an instance variable photos that holds on to an array, we instead have a behavior that's responsible for returning an array of photos through some other means than literally storing the data right here. So virtual attribute is like one term for that. Let's exit out and try again. So now we're inside the photos method, and I think the first thing we wanted to know is like, did this like work? Did all actually start as an empty array? Is instances of photos, or are instances of photos getting shoveled in here? And can we check on the value of that from outside of class photo? And I think we can. Let's try photo.all. Yeah, that's good. So we do have this photo.all, and here's the thing we could do too. Photo.all is an array, so that means it should respond to like bracket notation. And here's a little trick if you're ever trying to figure out how to get things into each mode loop, or each loop mode rather, in Ruby. See what syntax you need to do on the first thing. So call bracket 0 on the array before you call each. And so we have photo.all bracket 0. And what do I want to look at? I want to look at photo.all bracket 0. I want to see the user on that photo, right? And I remember that I started in an instance method. I was in user photos. So I know that if the first photo in this array responds to user with a user instance, I know that I can also get to whatever user instance is running this method right now with my self keyword. Same exact instance, right down to the hash. By the way, this is what Ruby checks for object equality when we do a double equals. So if I say photo.all bracket 0 dot user double equals self, that returns true. And now I've figured out the thing I need if I wanted to do something like a loop. Photo.all dot find, and then I'd do like do photo. That's what each one is. We just saw it. and now I can just paste what I had, right? But now instead of saying photo all bracket 0, whatever, we have that variable photo now because we figured out what's happening inside the array. And we just switch the syntax up like that. And that's a nice, easy-ish way to refactor like into a loop from just working with the first object in the array and seeing how that one would behave. So a fun little tip for trying to grok some like steps in code. So this is working. It seems to like return a matching photo object when we called this photo.all.find. And I think that that would work with a photo.all.select then too, right? Because what if like there's more than one photo that's tagged? Yeah, so notice the return is almost exactly the same, except we just remember that between find and select, although they both do use a boolean, although they both do filter for everything where that the boolean returns true for, find will only give you the first matching value, select will return all of them to an array. Find does nil if it misses, select does an empty array if it misses. So that's, I think, what they were kind of looking for in terms of this question, and this is why it's like the very last question, because it's seemingly very simple code, but it's all the other stuff that's like supposed to be sneaking around behind the scenes in your mental model. That if you're not as clear on that like class array stuff or using like photo.all as something searchable, then it can be really, really confusing how the heck we're just setting something onto a sandwich photo and then that's magically supposed to like put a photo here, right? I've seen people like take an attempt in here where they find that user and then they literally say something like user.photos shovel and they've set up like an instance variable. I've seen something like we might have photos be an instance variable like this, and then they don't have like any notion of like all array. So instead of having the code that we just did, which would be photo.all.select do photo.user equals self. Instead of having this virtual attribute, right, having an actual readable here, and then whenever we'd have something like this, where a photo.user equals, right, maybe then I'd see somebody doing something like add a reader user, and then writing a def user equals like this manually, which is like a clever way to do it, but not necessarily the best Ruby-ish way. But maybe this also shows the concept, right? Def user equals, and then it passes in a user instance, and so then I could say self dot user, or sorry, at user equals user, right? So that's like the basic writer part of a writer. But then I could also say user dot photos shovel self, right? I think this could also work for Sophie.photos being able to return something. And this is something that people might have arrived at. It does still print out Sophie when we run it, which is kind of cool. Go down here, Sophie.photos. Oh wait, we didn't p out Sophie.photos though. Let's run this, see if it worked. Yeah, check it out. That does actually get the Sophie photos object in there. And now we have this like Hall of Mirrors thing because the photo in the in the array holds on to a user, and the user has an array of photos, which is going to contain this photo once again, and then on and on and on down, which sometimes is a sign that you're violating single source of truth, which we technically are right now, right? With this kind of code, now we have an array of photos on the user, and then we'd also have this array of photos in the photo.all. And so I would always recommend refactoring past this. This is one way to show that you understand the object relationship for sure. But I think that the easier way is to do the one big leap across the class divide, and then through that be able to just express the existence of photos in one spot, and then go ahead and search that one spot of photos, knowing where your self is relevant to the objects that that photo has nested inside of it. Because since a photo belongs to the user, it holds on to the user. And that means that here we wouldn't actually need to write our own setter. We could go back to letting this be an accessor. It's a nice little review of the one-to-many relationship this morning too, right? The idea that like when object holds another object. Other questions?
So just to be clear, for my own fastidiousness, I suppose, the output that it shows is like the example output, which is just the photo object tag in an array with none of the other attributes, is not possible.
Yeah, so the specific this output here where they don't label anything within the photo in terms of like literally seeing the instance variables in here, I don't think that's the level of detail that they were intending to convey with this. So yeah, that's if that's the thing that's bugging you that doesn't line up, I would say that yeah, that's
Yeah,
you're not going to see this literal output when you call Sophie.photos because when you call Sophie.photos in that way, depending on like how you call it, like the what did I say when I called Sophie.photos specifically? I said p Sophie.photos, right? What if I said puts Sophie.photos? Let's see what that does.
I think it might do it,
Ah,
right? Yeah.
yeah. And so look at the oversight here, though. You actually never see the array itself when you puts out an array. When you call puts on an array of things, technically what happens is that Ruby iterates through the array and one by one calls puts on everything within the array. So to illustrate that, right, let's say array equals one, two, three, oops, one periods, two, three, four, five, great. And then I'll do a p array, right? That shows me an array of objects, right? And if I say puts array, it iterates through the array, prints out everything in the array, never actually shows me any array brackets. So yeah, I think that yeah, the what you alluded to originally, Nick, and what you were asking about originally, Dan, I think you're exactly on the mark here. That this is not valid like output syntax per se. We'd either see with a puts that we'd see the photo with the shorthand syntax but no array brackets around it because the array would have to be implicit because of puts, or with a p we would see the array brackets but then we would also see at minimum some representation of a user instance variable because of the way that we'd be outputting Sophie.photos. I wonder also though if we got into a pry session itself like and just called on Sophie.photos, if it's going to show the shorthand in the array or not, but I don't know if it will. Let's see. If we go, where's my pry? Shoot. Do I have? No, I'm going to do a binding.pry in here. Because maybe there is a third type of output, right? When we take p or puts out of it and we just ask for the value to return. So let's be as fair as possible and just see here. Sophie.photos. Nope. Yeah, so it actually just shows the actual return value there. And this is the same as if we had said p.
Yeah, I'm glad you went over this. I don't know about Dan's group, but our group spent at least an hour just trying to figure out how to get the return value to be the instance only without the attributes.
Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't yeah, that's apologies. That's I don't think was the intention of the curriculum writer there. So, I hope that as you went down that rabbit hole you at least like reinforced your awareness of like I do understand how this stuff is coming together. I do understand that this is an instance in the array. If there was ever any doubt about that, I've just looked at it 6 times in a row, so I'm pretty sure now.
We found some funky methods to try to do it that none of them worked, but it definitely reinforced that we knew what we were doing up until that point. So
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and Zoe, you're asking a great question. Is this sort of exact thing going to be on the code challenge on Tuesday? Not this exact thing, because that's not very specific. The kind of stuff that we're going to see on a code challenge on Tuesday is this kind of stuff, where we get to imagine that we have an art gallery and that we're going to be in charge of making an app to track paintings and the galleries that are selling them at a given time. So paintings have like attributes, and then artists have some attributes, and galleries have attributes, and they've built out some basic files with some code in them, and our task is to expand beyond that. So let me do like a 5-minute transition just to pick up from this photo notion so that we can get comfortable with how we'll test code in this realm too. I have photo and user in here in a file called photo.rb, and if that's grating on your nerves, just know that it's grating on mine as well. I also don't think that I should have a lot of runner code right in my class file because I have a lot of different class files to keep track of, and it feels like my code could get sloppy, or I could trip over myself, or I wouldn't feel as safe changing my code on the fly, not knowing like what it would do for that class's driver code to be able to run or not. So what I'm going to do is comment this out here just to like disregard it for the moment. And first I'm going to try to refactor user into its own file. I'm going to get rid of this pry statement here because I don't think this is where we're going to be debugging from anymore. I'm going to copy the user to the clipboard using the command X to cut. And then I'm going to do a new file in models called user.rb. We're going to drop our user class in here. And then I want to talk about some other stuff. I've got artist gallery and painting with these extra lines of code that I put in above the classes today, and I put these in myself. They weren't here to begin with. When I got Super Mario World, I was really sad. I like cried. I was 7 years old. I cried because I thought that my game was broken because I didn't get to start in the Forest of Illusion because I didn't realize that my friend had actually done work beforehand. So don't be really sad and try not to cry if you have to write your own put statements in to figure out how class files load. But I do think this is a really good debugging strategy, a really good like self-teaching tool. What I've done is I've marked with a nice little marquee every single time a class file gets loaded up. And when you get a code challenge, you're going to have a file code base very similar to this. You'll have an app config and a tools folder. This config is a really interesting folder. It contains this file called environment.rb. And in this file, we get, check it out, require pry, require relative app models artist, require relative app models gallery, require relative app models painting, right? And then we also have in here something called tools, and in the tools folder we have something called console.rb. Now console.rb, which I've also put a little marquee in here, the job of that file is to require the environment and then get us into a pry session and then say goodbye when we're all done, right? By requiring the environment, any file that's brought into play in the environment is in play in our console. So the idea here is that if I want to test my code, my runner file is toolsconsole.rb, who has the responsibility of bringing everything together. So maybe that's where I want to move this code from this photo class that I had. Right, this commented out stuff. We don't really need the binding.pry anymore at all. We can get this on the clipboard. Get rid of y'all. Let's see. Yeah, if we had a binding.pry enabled in the photo class, every single time the photo class loaded, it would kick us into pry. But if we're in the console.rb, every time we run this, it's going to kick us into a binding.pry session. Wherever that line is, it should do it. So if I move these things here, what I'm hoping for is like that we'll be able to do the same stuff as when all the code was together. And I'm not sure if we have it all together yet, but I'm going to try it out. So I'm going to try the first thing that I'll try is the mistake that people will make, ruby console.rb. Huh? No such file or directory, console.rb. What the H is going on? So then we do ls, and then we remember, oh yeah, there's that tools folder. ls tools, that's where console.rb lives. So we can say ruby tools slash console.rb. And then that will run our file. And it runs, ooh, and check it out. It says running console.rb. So the first thing that happened, let's track how Ruby does this. The first thing that happened when we ran the file is it starts running the file. And then it requires relative config environment.rb. So it goes to here. And then it requires pry. And then it requires artist.rb. So now it is loading this file. And that's why our output then says loading artist.rb. Right? Then we go to the next line in environment.rb where we load gallery. And that's why we get our output like so. Then we go to the next line, we get our painting, that gives us our painting output, and then we get to this uninitialized constant photo on console line 6. So why is it giving us uninitialized constant on console line 6? Any ideas?
Because you haven't required the photo.rb file.
Very good. Environment.rb was built just for this challenge. They actually hooked it up for me, right? Which, like, wonderful. I wouldn't have had to do too much if I just stayed within the bounds of the README that was given to me. But because we brought in that other stuff with user and photo, it's now up to me to kind of update the environment was given to me to, like, catch those new files. So that's not hard. It's like just following the pattern that we had and just making sure that user.rb and photo.rb get to come along for the ride. I'm even going to follow the convention of alphabetization, which I didn't intend this to line up so nicely, but when you get lucky, you get lucky. All right. Ruby Tools console, check it out. We made it to pry. We made it all the way to line 11. We managed to see, let's see, Sophie. We have that user. We can call Sophie.photos. Sweet. So we're like fully hooked up here now. And we've just had to take a tour through that bug and debugging process to see exactly how it is hooked up. That because environment knows about these files, then when console knows about environment, it also knows about all those files. You could call it like the transitive property of relative requirement, if you wish, right? It's kind of like every time you see this line, that file is getting copy pasted into this context. So this already had all of our files in it. Console then gets all those files, and then we can do whatever we want with users and photos. But it's Bob Ross rules. We're going to get away from Insta. We're going to, I like to take pictures manually, as we call it in the painting community. All right, so we're going to do some art and some galleries real quick. Sorry, that's Tevin from SF. He's got an attitude about a lot of things. Sometimes I don't iterate over hashes. Instead, I innovate over them. All right, so let's figure this out for real. In the README, it calls for some stuff, and this is the most important thing to do if you're in like a code challenge scenario. Is like know what's in the README. If you're practicing at home, like you should put on a clock for 60 minutes, and the first like 5 to 10 minutes of the 60, let that be about understanding the README. I'm going to demonstrate exactly what we should be doing. So we've got a job. We have paintings and galleries. I know this. I'm tracking nouns as I read the README. And I see that painting has a price and a title, and I think about this and I think about instance variables because I'm thinking about information that a class might have. And similarly here, I think that artist having a name and years of experience, I feel like that's two attributes living on an artist class as I kind of think through this. And a gallery has a name and a city. And I can think through this and try to like guess, but maybe I don't even have to guess this much because it says the initial files and basic attributes have already been built, but you'll need to figure out relationships. Okay, so that's a big tell, right? It's telling me that the main thing it's testing me on is how well I can put these things together and relate them, and then build out features that are based on those relationships. Since it says that some initial stuff has already been built, I want to now immediately kind of examine what's already here. And before I even move on, I'm going to do that. So I go in here, we have class artist, and it's got an add a reader of name and years experience. It looks like it initializes with two arguments every time, and then the first one gets set to a name, which I should be able to read, and the second one gets set to years experience, which I should also be able to read, right? So right away I can kind of envision myself calling artist.new, passing in like Van Gogh 30, and then like expecting to have like Van Gogh be the name and years of experience be 30. So that's kind of what I do in my brain, right? Now, I could keep reading code at this point, right? But I want to stress that I've just done the main thing that I said we should be doing today. So I want to put a big light bulb on it, right? We need to make predictions about our code. As I was reading through the code just now, I catch myself assuming some things about how the code's going to behave. I can even think of myself calling artist.new. I need to turn that thought into a reality before I get into that trap of like trying to think the whole solution before I start typing, right? We want our little fingers to be like steam release valves for stress energy, and we just solve micro pieces at a time. Think of what we haven't done yet in the context of the artist class. We haven't called artist.new. We haven't really made sure that this file is hooked up beyond just being able to print out loading artist.rb. They said that code was provided, but for all I know, like Flatiron School is like a Slytherin type thing that like puts little tricks and scams into the code to see if like we can handle debugging pressure on the fly. I don't even know if this stuff's gonna work, y'all. So like let's test that first. So I go to console.rb and let's make the artist that I just described. So I'll say Vince equals artist.new. Van Gogh, I think I'm supposed to say now. I should say Howda as well. I'm learning things, but I don't. It's tough. I'm learning new tricks, but I'm such an old dog. All right, so let's go in here to console and let's check on Vince. Since since I said so. No. But check that out. That's an artist, right? It's got a name, Van Gogh. It's got years experience. And then if I'm really curious at this point about how the reader works,
I got all of the houses his finished.
high five. Congrats. I'm very proud of you. Customizations tomorrow. Wait for it. She just got her houses ready for three neighbors. That's like 18 crafting items. She had to farm a lot of resources. So proud of her. Where were we? We had this Vince, right? And it has a name and it has years of experience. And we're looking at this adder reader, and maybe we know academically that this means that this is readable. And I could say that in a job interview confidently, but maybe I don't have as much practice like making Ruby tell me that that's the truth. So I test it. I say, Vince, can I call dot name on you? I can. Can I call Vince dot what is it? Experience? Oh no, not experience. Years experience. Okay, no problem. they what's lucky is that Flatiron does this wonderful setup step where they turn computer spits acid on me if I make a mistake feature off, so I don't have to like worry about that. I can just like do stuff and like let Ruby tell me if it was right or not, and I can learn from that. So I've got Vince, I've got artist figured out, and then maybe I go to gallery and I look at how this is set up. Okay, a gallery is set up with a name and a city. Let's just try testing that stuff out because I'm starting to get better at recognizing patterns here. I feel like if there's a class defined, it behooves me to figure out if that class works in real life and if I can work it out. So I'm going to say googs equals gallery dot new Guggenheim, and that's in NYC. So I try this again, right? And this is the thing. Notice how fast that was. I went in here, I looked at gallery, I made an intention that I wanted to make a gallery. I went into console, I wrote some stuff to make a gallery.new. I might have written a typo in there somewhere. Maybe I forgot a comma or a quote or something. I'm trying to get back to a place that I can run this again and see if I've made a mistake or not within like 30 seconds if I have a question that's that small. When I talk about a feedback loop, right? That's what I'm talking about. I want to have the smallest amount of time between when I can think to change something or test something and when I can see if that thought is coming true or not. So my thought was basically that similar to how an artist gets created, that I've just successfully created a gallery that has readers that I can test out and see them working. So I should be able to look at the Guggenheim, and I should be able to call .city, and I should be able to call .name, and I think these were readers in this one, right? And I can go and always double check, and there's no rush here. I haven't even started coding, right? I'm just trying to make sense of things and know where I'm at so far, because I don't want to try to re-implement behavior that I already have, right? I want to understand all the code that's here. And then we have this thing called painting. And painting has a title and a price. So add a reader title, add a reader price. So let's make a painting. I'm going to get rid of user and photo because like it's just making it harder for me to navigate what's happening. I'm just going to pare down some of these. Yeah, that's good. Console on the right. Great. Painting, title, and price. So we'll say do sunflowers for cool 400K. Let's try this out. Now, if my level of understanding of how these objects are going to come together is solid enough, like I might have already envisioned that Ruby was going to do this. But what if my envisioning was wrong? Has it cost me so much to make sure that I'm right in terms of time? I don't think so. In terms of what I've gained in confidence and forward momentum now, I feel like I'm on really solid ground in terms of like traction, that I know how these classes are set up now. I know that there should be runnability from each of these files. If I have any bugs later on, I've already pre-tested how this works in a simple state, so I know that the bugs weren't there to begin with, and I'm not feeling second guessed at that point. I basically haven't stacked up so much potential energy that it's starting to throw my kinetic energy off when I start to move. And so that's why working in small bursts is so key. Let's come back to the README. Now that we've understood things beyond this introduction, right? What are our deliverables? An artist can have many paintings. A painting can only be in one gallery at a time and only have one artist. And galleries can have many paintings. What are our models? What does our schema look like? What are the relationships between models? So the first thing I look for is like, is there a tricky many to many in here? An artist has many paintings. Does a painting belong to many artists? No, a painting can only have one artist. So that seems like a one to many. That seems like I have artist, one artist to many paintings. That seems straightforward. Let's talk about galleries and paintings. A painting can only be in one gallery at a time. I'm just going to always use singular words. A painting can only be in one gallery, but a gallery can have a lot of paintings in it. That seems to make sense to me. So another way to think about this is that it's a many to many, right? Because an artist, right, if I made 5 paintings and I sent them to 5 different galleries, I could say that my work is in 5 galleries. And a gallery might try to get new customers or new patrons if it's like a museum gallery by saying like, hey, we're featuring these 8 wonderful legendary artists right now. So the way I actually see this is that there's a many-to-many relationship between artist and gallery that goes through a join called painting. So this is backed up by the fact that a painting has one artist and one gallery at a time. When I see that in code, I see something like this, like artist equals artist, and we have an argument come in for that. And gallery equals gallery, and we have an argument come in for that. Because now we have this ability for, oh yeah, let's make this readable too. As a matter of fact, I think that these should be changeable because a painting moves, right? Well, wait, the artist shouldn't be changeable, but maybe the gallery should be as the painting moves around. I'm just trying to think of how I'd model this in real, like according to real life, right? I feel like the artist of a painting is going to be kind of fixed, but the gallery is more flexible. And I always default to just readability because like why would I create these walls called class definitions if I didn't want to like keep methods from being overexposed and then immediate like if I'm going to make a wall I wouldn't immediately blow 2 holes in the wall when one might do. So yeah, I'll provide both methods for gallery but only after thinking about it first. So if this is what we're adding for painting now, then how could we change this in our console just to see if like we've gotten that working, right? Small changes, small tests. So at this point, I think that we could add artist and then gallery. So title, price, artist, gallery. Sure. Let's do that in console. So we'll add an artist. Hey, we have an artist, right? We have Vince. Now here's a tempting place that somebody might want to write this. And we'd be close, but we wouldn't be there in a crucial way, right? Because it's not just that we have Van Gogh. We have Van Gogh with 30 years of experience. We have Vince. We have the whole object that encompasses all of that information. Not just an artist name, not just that string attribute, but the whole thing that has those string and the integer attribute. Same thing for the gallery, right? Let's just put Googs in there. And so now we've got this painting that should be able to talk to like the city that it's currently in and the number of years of experience of the person who painted it just from the perspective of the painting itself, which I don't know about you, but I think that's kind of cool. We have the sun, it's a painting object, it now holds an artist instance at artist, it holds a gallery instance at gallery, holds an integer at price, and a string at title, right? And that means that because these things were set for readability and writability, that what if we made like a new gallery, gallery.new, Dad's Basement in Peoria. It's a gallery of sorts if Dad is secretly an art thief, right? And then, oh no, I forgot to set a variable, but we remember that. We could say basement equals underscore, right? So I'll say sun dot gallery. That shows that the reader works, right? Sun being the painting object. Gallery has now returned the gallery object inside of it. And now I think if I say sun.gallery equals basement, that setter is tested. And now we have successfully stolen the painting from the Guggenheim and put it in Dad's basement, which is kind of fun. But we can't take the credit away from where it's due, right? If we say sun.artist, that should be the same. And if we tried to set this to something else, I don't think that's going to work. We don't have that, right? Sun.artist equals artist.new and initialize, whoever. Well, maybe it was trying to, oh no, I needed to have 2 things, right? Years of experience, sure, 20. Still another problem, right? Even after we've calculated the value for what's on the right of the equal sign, Ruby has a problem with the overall line with the equal sign because we don't have a setter for artists. We only have the getter. So that kind of tested the things that we've just added to our code, and then coming back to the README, we look for context here. It said to track this stuff, right? What are your models? What does your schema look like? What are the relationships? I think this would help us out, right? Because the painting as the many is supposed to belong to the one. And in this case, the painting has 2 things that it belongs to one of. So for each one of those, whether it says can only be in, whether it says can only belong to, whether it says have one, it's the oneness that tells us that's what the painting's job is to do. So that's why I decided to put an artist and a gallery on painting. this is kind of cool because I could imagine Van Gogh being on five different paintings in five different galleries, right? And that would tell me that like Van Gogh, Vince could call dot galleries somehow and get across these paintings to all of the galleries associated with paintings that were painted by that artist specifically. And I think that's going to be the point of what we do next. It says here that the methods that we need to write include artist.all, artist paintings, artist galleries, artist cities, artist.total experience, artist.most prolific, and artist create painting. Okay, well, let's start with artist all, right? We won't have time to write all of these, but I think the main thing that I'm trying to showcase is how can I start knowing what is asked of me and moving from what is asked of me to this first step of how can I predict how some code would work if I wrote it in a certain way? So I immediately go from the question to some code to solve the problem, and then having some way to see if I'm getting closer to my solution as I go. So for artist.all, that tells me it needs to be a class method. So just to make sure that I can write a class method, I could try first saying def self.all. And to really stress that we only really do need to write one line of code or do one thing at a time in order to test our work, just to see if I have an undefined method or not, right? I don't even have to fill this method out yet, but I'd be getting closer to have this method defined than when I didn't have it, right? Even if it's just an inch, let's see if we can test for that. Now I call artist.all. Yeah, it returns nil. It doesn't say undefined method, right? If I said artist.alls, that's what I would get if I tried to call a class method that wasn't defined. This tells me that I've got this defined. So what's this going to have to do? It's going to have to return like some array of artists. I remember that we tend to call that like a class variable, and all white might as well match the name. Now, if I say something like this, all equals array, I'm going to be making a mistake. Every time I call the class method, that's going to reset all to an empty array. I don't want to do that. I just want to return this with whatever value it has. I can set this initial value just up in the class scope as we're getting started. That's the best place to do it. And then, because we have the array defined before we run initialize on an instance for the first time, we can then shovel into that array. And if you're feeling really fancy, then you could say like self.class to move from this instance up to capital A artist and then call .all on that. Either one of those would work. I just want to be really explicit for this because my goal is to like just be clear about what's going on and try to make sure that I'm making clear predictions about clearly defined code. So if this works, I'm predicting that by creating one artist, which I think we did in our console before, right? By creating Vince, I think that when we go into binding.pry, if this is hooked up right, Vince would have ended up in all now, and we should be able to access Vince in an array if we call self.all. So once I have a prediction, I want to test it. And I'll call on Vince to make sure that the artist was created. I'll call on artist.all to see Vince in there. Yeah, that's the artist that we made. That's the artist showing up in artist.all. And that tells me that that README thing has been satisfied. So artist paintings, an array of all the paintings by an artist. Okay, so we do have that one painting called Sunflower. And as we compare, we can see that like this is exactly the same artist here in artist.all as this painting's artist here. So like Vince is the same exact person as the thing stored on this particular painting. So I'm wondering now, like, how am I supposed to give a paintings by an artist? And I'm kind of thinking, like, am I supposed to make my own array on artist? I know that Duke keeps on talking about single source of truth, and that doesn't seem like what he's been doing, but I also don't see anything about painting. And then I realize I haven't read through the whole README yet. Yeah, it sure enough is calling for us to write painting.all. It sure enough is also calling for us to write gallery.all. So it might have been a better strategy for me to just read through every single deliverable before I fully got started. But in the interest of time, I also wanted to show like that it's possible to even start in a different path and then decide to redirect. So we will have this total experience, total years of experience of all artists. That seems like it's only going to need to know about the artist class. Artist with the highest amount of paintings per year, that's going to need to rely on like how many paintings an individual artist has and calling that and maybe maximizing by that value or sorting by it and then getting the highest one. creating a given painting. This feels like, given title, price, and gallery, we know that a painting has 4 attributes. This feels like the shape of thing where self is going to have to come in as the fourth argument inside the method definition to make that painting whole, not just with a gallery, but with the artist themselves that's calling that method at the time. So yeah, painting.all, and then painting total price. This is supposed to be a class method that iterates through every single painting in painting.all, and as it goes, it's supposed to sum up all of the prices, right? So that we can calculate the overall value. Gallery.all give us all the galleries. This should give us all of the paintings in a given gallery. So this seems similar to how an artist is supposed to be able to get over to all of their paintings, like up here, right? But an artist is also supposed to go and get all of their galleries and also see all of those gallery cities. And similarly, a gallery is supposed to get over to its artists and get over to its artist names. So there's sort of a butterfly wing-shaped symmetry here as they go through painting and into each other to access information. And then we'd want to be able to figure out what the most expensive painting in a given gallery is too. So having now gone through all of these, I come back to these .alls, I look at my artist.all, I'm like, oh, let me just go and make class methods for all of these. Let's make, oh wait, painting has all. Huh. Gallery, does gallery? No, gallery doesn't. Cool, it has all. And then that means that, oh wait, and if I have painting, I could even have used this a little bit. If they have this, then I just need the class method too, right? Def self.all. We need to shovel in here. At all, shovel in this instance from this instance method, and then in here we're in a class method because the method name starts with self, so we'll return the class variable from that class method. This is the same self.all that's going to be in here, same end of initialize. Let's just be real sneaky with it. Ooh, that felt good. You know you like that. Aesthetically, come on, that's a good copy paste. Let's celebrate. Alright, let's go and test it to celebrate. The only celebration is in testing today. Artist.all. Gallery.all. Painting.all. This is good. This feels great because now if I can get to painting.all from here in the console, then I think I can get there from an artist, right? I should be able to now, like, if I want to say artist.paintings, def paintings, then maybe I move my binding.pry in here. And then I come to my console and I just quiet this one down and I call the line that I need to make sure that paintings is a method that's running this time. So it's an artist method, so I call vince.paintings. Coming back to our goal, right, that would be an example of me like trying to have a tight feedback loop, but understanding sometimes that like pry needs to be used out in the console, and that sometimes I prefer to put it inside of a method that I'm not done with yet. And I don't generally like to stack my pries up because then it's hard to exit, and sometimes I forget which console or which scope I happen to be in. So if I turn it on one place, I try to turn it off in the other place, and then simultaneously turn on a call to the method that's going to call on the debugger for me. And that's like a little habit that I've gotten into because then it puts me into like a specific instance's scope in a way that's really helpful. Like from here, I'm in paintings as Vince, right? If I say self, boom, there's Vince. That's who I am because that's who I just called the paintings method on. So from here, I think even though I'm inside of an artist, because we're running all this through the console, because the console knows about all of our files, that means that we should be able to call on painting.all. And the pattern here is who can tell me the enumerable method that I'm going to need to sort out whether any paintings in this array happen to belong to good old Vince.
Select.
Select is the one that we could use. We could call painting.all.select. We always name our pipe variable after what one thing in the array is, so each thing is a painting. And we're going to test whether painting, and we've tested this method out in the console too, so I know it's going to work, painting.artist needs to be the same as that self artist that we just saw. And when we run this, this works, and I feel super, super stoked. And so then I try to copy paste the code in, and it doesn't go as well as I planned because I have this extra stuff. But this is nice though too because I can command D it out. Boom, it's gone. And then I hit command right bracket, and that fixes the indentation for me a couple of times. So I have like keyboard shortcuts that let me through, and that helps. This is all in the interest of a tight feedback loop, right? I'm not trying to show you like I'm an ultimate keyboard warrior or anything. I'm actually an extremely slow typist, but to the extent that my editor can help me out, I try to let it help me out and try to always be learning like little new ways that it can help. Anyways, I think that this is going to work because we just saw it work in the console. So now, like, my concern is catching false positives. So I want to make some more artists and some more paintings to expand on this basic stuff that we did when we were exploring. And this is where I really start to what we call seeding information, right? I'm seeding data that I can use repeatedly to test out these relationships. So let's make some. I believe personally, now this is just me, that Banksy is not a person but more of an idea like the gray fox, and since time immemorial, various people have just worn that mantle. So I'm deciding to say 2,500 years of experience for Banksy collectively. It's additive. I mean, look at how that rat looks as just a shadow in spray paint. An ancient talent. Let's make another gallery called like call it the spot. It's a cool spot. It's like a hot Chicago art spot. Have another gallery here. Shout out to the Michiganders in the room, and then we can make some other paintings, right? Let's make some more. Let's have trying to be as realistic as possible with how like Banksy would name and price a painting. That sounds like enough. And let's put that in the spot. And let's have like more than one painting in the spot. Let's say that like Van Gogh has like a whole thing happening. So and this is where you get to have a little fun, but you also want to like, as this is my Bob Ross note, that there's no limit to how much fun you can have with like creating seed data. But this is exactly a bike shed shaped thing, right? You can spend an hour just making fun seed data and not actually encountering whether you got your methods working right. So make sure you put a time box on this kind of stuff. But we're gonna do this one for 250K by Vince. Put that one in the googs as well. And then the yard has no paintings in it right now, and Banksy only has one painting to Vince's two. So yeah, sure, why not? So that means we should be able to call Vince.paintings and have that show. Let's have it call Banksy.paintings. That way we can see like just one painting in an array, ideally, and none of the two that Vince made. And actually, I'll have this p out so we can see the actual array of objects and all their instance variables, and we have no binding.pry running in paintings anymore. So I think we're ready to try that out. So now I'm here. We looked at Banksy.paintings, and we see this one painting, World's Bad, in it, and it's by Banksy as the artist. It's stored at the gallery, the spot, and then we could also call like Vince.paintings. And this is cool because if I wanted to go to the step of getting to galleries, then I already see that I have galleries in each of these paintings, right? So the reason that the next step is always to map is because we could get a new array that's just gallery instances if we just kind of plucked those out of each painting. So we could say vince.paintings.map to painting, and we could pull the gallery from each one. And that gives us this nice array of galleries. And so right here, instead of saying vince.paintings, if I wanted to have that behavior for galleries, we just kind of paste in what we did in the console. So I think as Nick alluded to and showed you a little bit of yesterday, like it's nice to be able to go into a pry session, play around with the code until it's doing what you need it to do, and then copy the working code back into the abstract space and figure out how to turn your actual variable names into their abstract counterparts that fit in the context that you're in. This is, I think, our goal is to be able to declare what we want our code to do, and then more importantly, be able to figure out how to get our code to do it in a way that we can check on it. So notice like my shameless putzing of things, right? A lot of times if I'm curious about a variable somewhere in here, if I'm not sure what painting is, I might do something like this. Puts painting is, and then I do like p painting. And then every time I run through that part, We get a chance to go painting is, and then I get to take a look. So look how busy all this output was. But I can still go up here and I can spot what I'm looking for. Yeah, I do want to clean this stuff up. Yeah, I want to comment out this like commentary before I like submit final version of code. But I don't want to run Ruby in the dark. Ruby is the compiler. It's the perfect interpreter of the language that it itself is. So like I need to talk back and forth to Ruby. When you did pre-work, all those sections were called coding as a conversation because the end goal is to get proficient enough with that pre-work basic syntax to be able to say, yeah, Ruby, I need to know something from you that I don't know, but I do know enough about you to ask you that question and to trust that I can get a good answer. So that's, I think, the kind of goal of today. As I would go through the rest of this README, I'd have to go and continue and work with like beyond galleries. I'd probably have to map over galleries and get my cities. Like off the top of my head, I feel like that would almost be exactly the same. And this is where like a snowball effect might hit once you start to catch a pattern. Self.galleries.map. And then I just really want to try the flex of like ampersand colon city. Because I'm pretty sure that a gallery, yeah, it has an adder reader for city, and so I think I can use the ultimate map shorthand. And I think the goal is that if you've been talking back and forth with Ruby for long enough, that eventually you get to the point where you can call on these things and kind of trust that it's going to go the way that it needs to go because you've already seen it go that way so many times before. But there's really no shortcut to it. And so at first, like being able to like really slow down and take a look at how everything does come together and forcing yourself to go like, okay, how is console set up? What is config environment? How does this apply to these files? Oh, I get it. They want me to just have this be like my runner file. Oh, they want me to do some stuff before pry, and then when pry comes in, maybe I have some variables that I can play with. This is a pattern. There's other patterns out there. I think that this is an extremely resilient and reusable pattern, and so it's one that I strongly recommend, and that's why I wanted to have this talk with people today. Any other questions? Cool, cool.